young mother found dead in a cemetery.
She'd been stabbed 25 times.
The killer saw Cynthia McLuhan as this object to play with by posing her.
It sounds profoundly sick because it is.
For 3 years, police are baffled.
The investigation continues until we find out who's responsible.
It was a total mystery.
Until Sergeant Joe Kenda realizes this case goes much deeper than he'd ever imagined.
And all the experience of all the people in this room have never seen this before. Could this be the rarest of criminals? A savagely evil serial killer. When a case becomes cold, it's the ultimate frustration. You are searching for a shadow, a ghost. But do we surrender? Absolutely not. There's one thing that never changes: murder.
It's getting late, and the Uinta Gardens shopping center is looking like a ghost town. The pharmacy is the last store to lock up.
The store was being closed at 9:45 by the manager, Joe, and Herlinda, who was one of the cashiers.
There was snow outside, and it was cold.
Is that Cynthia's car?
Looks like it.
Cynthia worked the cosmetic counter.
What's she still doing here?
Immediately, this is bad, because she checked out 45 minutes before.
The lights were on, and the car was running.
Cynthia?
And the windshield had some ice scraped off.
Where is she?
We just thought that was kind of strange. Why would she leave her car just sitting there running?
Cynthia!
Cynthia?
None of it made any sense at all. The worst thing you could possibly think comes to your mind.
Cynthia!
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 3 years later, after a long stint in patrol, Sergeant Joe Kenda has recently returned to Homicide. But this time, not as a detective.
I returned to Homicide as a supervisor. As the boss, you always have feelings about what you'd like to do to improve things, to change things. So I began reviewing unsolved missing persons cases and unsolved homicide cases to determine if there was any possibility they could now be resolved.
Hey, Beverly, I need to schedule a meeting. Can you contact everyone in the field and have them here by 12 o'clock sharp? Thanks. Bye. All right, gentlemen, listen up. You guys have done one hell of a job last year closing cases. But this year, I think we can do a little bit better.
When Kenda took over as a sergeant in the Detective Bureau, we welcomed his involvement. He was smart, well-educated, very charismatic.
I want to revisit some of the cold cases that we let slip through. The question is, which ones do we look at? Now, I've got a few thoughts, but I want to hear your ideas.
With my team of homicide detectives, I wanted some unit cohesion, and I was interested in what they thought about everything. Many heads are better than one.
How about you, Lou? Any ideas?
Detective Lou Smith had an instinct for it, unlike any other.
Well, I didn't work it, but how about Cynthia McLuhan? She went missing in '82.
The Cynthia McLuhan case was one we all really wanted to solve.
All right, let's look at the case file.
Though none of Kenda's detectives personally worked the case, they know enough to bring him up to speed.
Cynthia McLuhan. She was 22 years old when she went missing. Coworkers found her abandoned vehicle in the parking lot where she worked.
No evidence in the car and no witnesses.
Okay, then, who'd they talk to first?
The family.
Detectives went to the home of Cynthia's mom.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Which is where Cynthia's living with her daughter, Stacy. And Cynthia's friend, Mary, is there also.
Look, I know this is all very, very shocking, but we need to know more about your daughter if we're gonna find her.
Well,
Cynthia and Stacy moved in with me recently because money's been a little tight. Cynthia works 2 jobs and I help out and watch Stacy.
Is she aware of what's going on?
No, not really. She keeps asking for her mama, but I don't know what to say. I keep telling her she'll be home soon.
Cynthia did everything she did for her girl, for her daughter. Her relationship with her daughter was something that was never separable.
What we need to find out is if there was anyone in Cynthia's life that would want to harm her.
The next step would be to determine who does Cynthia associate with. People don't get abducted generally by a stranger.
I don't know.
It was a total mystery. I mean, no idea what had happened. Cynthia really did not have enemies. Can't say that there was really anybody that disliked her.
What about Stacy's father? Where is he?
He and Cynthia were married for a short time, but things didn't work out.
They're curious about someone that had a motive to do her harm. And the first and obvious choice is the ex-husband.
But he lives in Arizona.
Even at the first moment of disappearance, there was never a thought of him doing anything like that.
They talked to him on the phone. He is in Arizona, and he provides an alibi the day she goes missing. He's not part of this.
How about a boyfriend? Was Cynthia seeing anyone that you know of?
Well, recently she's been seeing a guy named Dave.
Dave.
Winfield. Dave Winfield.
And of course, the detectives are immediately interested in David Winfield. Who is he? Did they end their relationship badly?
What do you know about Dave? Is there any issues with him?
I don't know of any issues during the relationship, but I know that Dave was pretty heartbroken when she ended things.
Yeah, that's true.
Good job. What letter is this? No, you don't know? Yeah, sure you do. That's a J. I'll get it. Hello?
Hi, it's me. Listen, can we just talk? I love you. If we could just give it another try.
Dave, we've talked about this, okay?
Cynthia,
No,
you don't
Dave.
understand.
I'm sorry, I gotta go.
Wait.
He would do anything to get her back.
There was concern on the mother's part that the ex-boyfriend might have tried to abduct her, to try to force her into accepting their relationship and going back the way it was.
At that point, detectives focused their attention on 34-year-old Dave Winfield as Cynthia's possible abductor.
Detectives did some digging. They found out that Dave secretly spent some time at the hide and seek.
At the time, the Hide and Seek Lounge was the largest homosexual bar between the Mississippi River and the West Coast.
That information certainly put a different perspective on the case.
So apparently he liked both men and women. I'm sure he didn't want people to know about that.
Right.
In the modern day, homosexuality is universally accepted for the most part. In the 1980s, it was a secret world.
In Colorado Springs, having a gay affair was particularly scandalous. It could hurt you at your job. If you were in the military, it could get you discharged. I mean, the ramifications were huge.
The speculation might have been that Cynthia somehow discovered this, and Dave Winfield was now trying to suppress that information from coming out.
And once Dave found out that we were asking around town about him, he decided to show up at the station.
No kidding.
Did you have anything to do with the disappearance of Cynthia?
I care a lot for Cynthia. I'd never do anything to hurt her.
Did she have any issues with your little trips down to the hide and seek lounge?
What? How do you know about that?
Look, Mr. Winfield, we're not interested in your private life. We're just trying to figure out, perhaps, would that be a problem for Cynthia if she was aware of that?
No, okay? Cynthia never knew about that. Even if she did, she wouldn't tell anyone.
So it gives you an insight on Cynthia. She just seemed to be a nice, trustworthy woman.
You have an alibi?
Yeah, it checked out.
So Winfield is out. No opportunity.
Okay, so what's next?
It turns out that more evidence surfaced the night that Cynthia disappeared.
Just 2 hours after Cynthia McLuhan vanished from work, a sinister clue was discovered at a nearby motel.
In doing his nightly rounds, a security guard for one of the motels
What the hell?
came across some clothing outside of one of the motel rooms.
The clothing is just dropped, dumped in a pile. And under the clothing is a purse. There are credit cards, there is some money. And it also contains Cynthia McLuhan's Colorado driver's license.
The motel had no record of Cynthia checking in, and when the items were turned in to police, they quickly caught the attention of detectives.
Was the clothing hers?
They matched the description that she was last seen wearing when she left work. But not all of her clothes have been accounted for.
What do you mean?
Her bra and panties were missing.
The clothing that's missing are intimate apparel, so it suggests there may have been some sexual involvement.
When there's evidence of abduction and sexual assault, the end result is never good.
The room where the clothes were found outside of, did we look into who checked into it?
We did. It turns out that the apartment wasn't rented for 1 week.
And nothing materialized from there. Detectives have been all over the area for weeks and didn't turn up any new leads.
When someone goes missing, the more time that passes by, the more difficult things become. You have no place to go and nowhere to find your victim until they are found by someone.
It was a bone-chilling afternoon, 42 days after Cynthia McLuhan disappeared from her workplace.
A 17-year-old named Robert Stogner was jogging through a cemetery in the west side of Colorado Springs.
As Robert went through Fairview Cemetery, he noticed something looked odd. And in fact, as he got closer,
This is no longer a missing persons case. Somebody took her and killed her. We're investigating the disappearance of 22-year-old Cynthia McLuhan. She has been missing for 42 days. Body has been discovered in Fairview Cemetery.
Because it was so cold outside, her body was well preserved.
In cold temperatures, aside from the whiteness of the skin, they look the same as they did when they were alive.
It was a brutal scene.
I responded to the cemetery. Cynthia's body was covered with blood. She'd been stabbed numerous times. She was completely naked except for her shoes and her socks.
There are definite signs of sexual assault.
Yeah, no doubt.
There is rape, there is murder.
Her bra and panties are missing from the pile of clothes at the motel.
Killer probably kept them for himself.
It's often thought that when the killer takes one of the possessions of the victim, that it's a trophy. It can be a source of pride when they remember that they were able to subdue another human being.
How her body's just positioned up like that?
Yeah, that's strange.
She's kind of sitting down but bent forward, a very unnatural position. It's not one that would look comfortable. Out of all the homicides I've worked, I don't remember ever coming across a body position just this way.
Some sexual criminals will pose the remains and stand back and admire them for a period of time. It sounds profoundly sick because it is.
This guy didn't hold anything back, did he?
She had been stabbed 25 times.
Get some photos.
So do you know if the sexual assault happened in the cemetery or was it just a dumping ground?
Well, it's possible. We didn't see any drag marks or any kind of blood trails.
This is a remote cemetery with very little foot traffic, which is precisely why Cynthia's killer brought her there. The ghost, the shadow, shows up in that parking lot.
Let go! Shut up!
Forcibly puts her in his car, drives to the cemetery, raped her, and immediately killed her in the same spot. And then drove off with her clothing and dumped it in this motel in the central downtown.
Canvas of the area turn up anything?
Sort of. We came across a guy who said he saw a dark-colored pickup truck leave the cemetery a few weeks before. So we looked throughout the neighborhood to see if we could find a similar pickup truck.
One of the people that we find who would own that pickup truck is a Richie Hayden. He lived 2.5 blocks from the Fairview Cemetery.
This guy said he was at the cemetery, but he was there because of the great view at Pikes Peak. Sounds a little suspicious, but we couldn't find anything that ties him to Cynthia.
There's nothing about him that alarms them. He has an explanation for his behavior.
Okay, then what?
Nothing.
Case went cold.
They believed it was someone connected to her that hated her for whatever reason, but they could never determine that anybody she'd ever known hated her for any reason at all. So the case sort of dies.
After the notification of finding Cynthia and still no leads, it just went on for a long time, several years of no information or nothing being said about it. Very, very difficult.
Okay, then. It's time to heat this thing back up.
We all agree that Cynthia McLuhan is an innocent victim. No doubt about it. That inspires us.
John Lou, I want you to take the lead on this one, but we're all going to be working it with you.
This case had a lot of emotional appeal. Personally, this was one I really wanted to take on.
So the working theory of the case still remains that it's someone she knew. The reason that's true is stranger crimes are rare. They represent less than 5% of all murders.
The first thing we need to do is re-interview the original witnesses and revisit the old leads, starting with the guy with the dark truck. What's his name?
Richie Hayden.
Time has a way of loosening tongues, and every experienced policeman knows it.
All right, let's go.
I'm thinking we should start with this guy first because he's got a record a mile long, and we're looking for...
Hey.
So Anderson is assigned a lead about Richie Hayden.
Man, Richie Hayden has a sexual assault conviction. It's not all. Got his employment history. Take a guess at where he worked as a dishwasher in 1982.
I'll be damned.
Lo and behold, what does he find? During the time of the crime, he worked at the motel where the clothing was discovered. You don't have to be a mathematician to know that 2 + 2 = 4. So, Mr. Hayden, we need to have an up close and personal with you again. We have reopened the Cynthia McLuhan homicide as a cold case. During the course of that work, we have determined an individual who has some very interesting parts to his life that makes him emerge as a suspect.
Kenda and his team would like to speak with 30-year-old Richie Hayden, but he no longer lives by Fairview Cemetery. In fact, he's now on parole in Wyoming.
So you're saying I'm going to have to send you to Wyoming?
Maybe before we do that, we see if he's worth our time.
We knew from Cynthia's autopsy that when Cynthia was sexually assaulted, her killer left behind evidence of his own blood type. So we can compare that with the blood type of a potential suspect and eliminate certain people.
The next step in terms of this individual, Mr. Hayden, is to determine what is his blood type.
Why don't you check with the lab and let me know what you find out?
Sure.
So Detective Anderson makes a call to the laboratory and says, what do you know about this guy? Tell me about his blood type. And they tell him that evidence has already been obtained because of the count of sexual assault.
All right, stick out your arm, make a fist.
And as it turns out, his blood type is different than that of the perpetrator of this crime. So despite his truck, despite his criminal record, despite his employment at the hotel, it's not him.
Without a suspect, Kenda and his team begin retracing old steps in hopes of sprouting a new lead.
And one thing we wanted to do was to go back and talk to Cynthia's close friends at the time. One of those was Mary Dodito. She had been at Nancy's house, the mother's house.
Her and Cynthia were best friends.
I assumed that the investigation was over.
No, ma'am. The investigation continues until we find out who's responsible.
Mary, we're wondering if you might remember anything that you might have forgot to mention when Cynthia first went missing.
Well, there is something I probably should have said a long time ago.
Well, if it's something that might help us find Cynthia's killer, I'm sure she would want us to know.
There was a guy that Cynthia was dating that nobody knew about.
Why was it a secret?
He was married.
He's married? Really? Now that's interesting.
I should have said something sooner. I didn't want to say anything in front of Cynthia's mom, and at that point we were hoping she was still alive.
Mary, it's okay.
You got to keep in mind, this was her good friend, and so I understand why she didn't do it at that point.
So who is this guy?
His name's Steve Carlton. She had a second job, and he worked with her there.
You finding everything okay?
I am, but do you have any socks?
Cynthia and Steve Carlton met because he was working as a security guard.
According to Mary, he had told Cynthia that he was getting a divorce. Turned out that wasn't the case.
Cynthia, I'm sorry. All right, I should have told you sooner.
Yeah, you should have, you lying piece of Now I'm the one who looks like the bad guy. Maybe I should just call your wife and see how she feels about all of this.
Don't you dare, Cynthia!
Screw you!
Sometimes married men want to protect their wife from ever finding out. Murder is one way to do it.
Do you know if Steve still works at the same place?
Not that I know of. I haven't seen him in a while. I just know he was in the Army.
We've been very helpful. Thank you for being honest with us. We'll let ourselves out.
After learning of Steve Carlton, investigators reach out to Fort Carson to see if he has shown up on their radar.
Active military have their own police called the CID, which stands for Criminal Investigation Division. They investigate criminal matters involving active duty military.
Sergeant Steve Carlton. Where do I remember that name from? It says in '82 he put in a transfer for South Korea.
Really? And what month was that?
Be December.
That was shortly after Cynthia's murder. So our question was he trying to distance himself from this murder?
Was his request granted?
No, it was denied due to poor performance on his part. He's been under investigation multiple times.
And what'd he do?
Sexual misconduct.
Turns out this guy is accused of making obscene phone calls to various women on the base. Further, there's been someone going into the ladies' locker rooms on the post and stealing their underwear. And the military police believe it's this guy.
That's bizarre.
Yeah, you could say that.
We're gonna need to speak with Mr. Carlton as soon as possible.
Think I'll make that happen?
Mr. Carlton now emerges. Not only does he have a relationship with our victim, but now we have knowledge that he's potentially involved in sex crimes in the military. That adds up to suspect. So here we have a married man who is dating Cynthia McLuhan. And he's currently under investigation for 2 minor sexual offenses. So let's go find Mr. Carlton and see what he has to say.
Sergeant Carlton, thanks for coming and talk to us.
What's this about? Cynthia McLuhan. Cynthia? Did you guys find the guy that killed her?
We were told you were having a relationship with her. Is that true?
Yeah, we did.
Mr. Carlton says they became friends, they began to socialize after work on a few occasions, and then they engaged in an extramarital affair.
But we ended it a few weeks before she went missing.
Whose idea was that?
Mine.
Was Cynthia upset about that?
No. I mean, we both knew what we were doing was wrong.
He says he finally decided to break it off because he was afraid his wife would find out.
You think I killed Cynthia?
We didn't say that. But you were having a secret relationship with her. And we were also made aware of some of the questionable things you did in the past.
Like what? Some inappropriate acts sober at Fort Carson. Oh, that's garbage. I didn't do any of that stuff.
He vehemently denies both of these crimes. I didn't do it. I never called anybody. I've never been in that locker room.
Look, I didn't kill Cynthia. I didn't have any reason to want to harm her. Once when I found out that she was murdered, I didn't know. She was a good person. I swear on my life, I didn't kill Cynthia.
Steve Carlton claimed he really cared for her, that he wouldn't have killed her. You seem very believable.
All right, you're free to go. For now.
He is just somebody that we thought was interesting, and we've just lost interest in him.
With yet another suspect out of the running, the investigation begins to lose steam.
Where are we now in this case? Why can't we find a legitimate suspect who has a relationship with our victim?
Same dead end we hit 3 years ago.
Kenda wonders, perhaps he's been going about this the wrong way. Instead of focusing on the victim, what about the crime itself?
In this case, think about it. Abduction from a parking lot, rape, extreme knife violence, the way he positioned the body. I mean, it all seems pretty peculiar.
Sexual criminals commit a crime in precisely the same way on every occasion. These are not isolated incidents. These people tend to commit and reoffend all the time. It's what they do. Their appetite increases for the behavior.
Ken, are you saying you think this is a serial killer?
Well, that's certainly a possibility. But that would mean he's done this before, or at least in the 3 years since. Let me ask you this. Have either of you been involved in a murder like this before? Because I sure haven't.
Really?
No.
What if our guy doesn't have a relationship with our victim? What if our man is a transient? He is a tourist. He's here for a time and then he's gone again. And he is elsewhere doing the same thing. We've never considered it.
Which means if we're going to catch this guy, we're going to need to start looking at similar cases outside of Colorado. Let's go. All right, listen up.
Kenda and his team expand their search to a national scale.
So we've put together a broadcast to all law enforcement agencies in the U.S. describing our crime and asking for similar offenses or similar MOs by perpetrators in their jurisdiction, from huge departments to tiny ones. The national broadcast is out for a while, and we're not getting much results.
Hey, Kenda, I think I've got something here.
But all of a sudden, we do.
It's from Florida.
Lou Smith found a correspondence from a homicide detective in St. Petersburg, Florida, mentioning a James Lamar Rhodes.
The guy's 26 years old, It says here he's raped and attempted murder of 4 different girls with a knife. He's also suspected of 2 full-blown murders. Sound familiar?
Rhodes had abducted 4 young girls in 45 days. One of them sounded remarkably similar to Cynthia's.
In June of 1984, a 17-year-old girl who worked at an ice cream shop went outside end of her shift.
Hey, you want to go for a jog?
And a man approached her.
Come on. What are you doing? Let me go.
I wouldn't say a word if I were you.
The man then took her to a secluded place by some railroad tracks and proceeded to rape her and stab her repeatedly. James Rhodes left her for dead. But she did not die.
Somehow she survived and was able to identify Rose as a suspect, and the physical evidence confirmed it. And guess where the bastard was December '82? Colorado Springs.
He was living in Colorado Springs for approximately 60 days during the time frame that the Cynthia McLuhan case occurred.
So how do we find this guy?
Well, he's currently in Florida prison. He's serving 6 consecutive life sentences for attempted murder.
Looks like we need to go to Florida.
When somebody gives you a series of facts that are so good, that fit perfectly with what you're doing, you can feel it. This is him. There is no doubt in anyone's mind that James Lamar Rhodes is our target. We need to go to Florida and have him tell us that.
Well, the only way to get this sicko is to get a confession from him.
You know, I'm game.
I selected Detective Smith because Smith had a gift. He was the most remarkable interrogator I have ever seen. It was almost as if Lou Smith could walk into a field full of cows and in 15 minutes they'd be offering him free milk.
All right, we need to learn as much as we can about him. Anderson, I want you to lead the research on this guy.
You got it. Let's do this.
It's important when a detective sits down with a suspect that you're armed with as much information as you can.
While Smith is en route to Florida, Kenda's team is preparing background info to pass on to him.
Can you hang on a second? So what do you got from Anderson?
This guy definitely had his issues. We pulled his psychological profile from the state of Florida. It seems he grew up in a dysfunctional family.
Can I call you back? Thanks. Bye.
James Rhodes suffered a great deal of trauma in his growing up. Watching his father beat his mother, he getting beaten up by his mother. It was a family full of turmoil, full of violence.
So apparently he had a pretty tumultuous relationship with his mother.
Where the hell are you, James?
As James Rhodes reports, his mother was a brutal woman.
I'm warning you. Get your ass over here.
She would hit him mercilessly and, in fact, encouraged him in many ways to embrace violence.
He seemed he could have harbored hate for women that may have come from his mother.
He was so filled with hate for his mother, he left home when he was 14, and he literally became a drifter.
Looks like Schmidt's gonna have his hands full with this guy.
I'd say.
The following day, Smith arrives at Florida's Cross City Correctional Center to speak with their #1 suspect.
This is Smith's opportunity to work his magic, and he is magical.
Mr. Rhodes, I'd like to thank you for having this meeting with me. I'm Detective Smith.
I understand you want to talk about a case?
Well, actually, James, I really want to talk about you. You see, James, I'm curious as to how you ended up in Colorado a few years back.
No particular reason. I struggled to find work in Texas, so I always loved the mountains. I headed over to Colorado Springs and found a job as a roofer.
I did a little carpentry myself.
Yeah?
Yeah, I was not an expert, but I did some stuff around the house. Made me feel like a man. Like I was really in control. You know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Smith knew how to establish rapport with Rhodes. In a very short period of time, they were chatting as if they were lifelong friends.
James, you probably saw a lot of different places when you were a kid, right? Well, I bet that was hard, having to always be responsible for yourself.
You wouldn't know the half of it.
What do you mean?
You wouldn't believe some of the things I've done in the places I've been. Hell, I'd write a book about it if they wouldn't throw me in the electric chair.
All serial killers are narcissists. They like attention. And I think if it were possible, every psychopathic killer would probably write a book, because they would then have a chance to brag about what they did.
And what would you write about during your stay up there in Colorado?
Look, I'd tell you, but I don't want them to fry me.
What if I told you that they won't? The DA says he'll take the death penalty off the table.
All right, I'll tell you what happened.
No. I want you to show me.
Smith says, we're going to transport you back to Colorado, and I want you to walk me through this. I want you to show me what you did.
All right. What the hell?
Not 24 hours later, Kenda picks up Smith and Rhodes at the airport, and they set out on their guided tour of murder.
When James Rhodes came back to Colorado, he wanted to show off. He was going to get one more thrill out of it and show how well he did what he did.
It was right here. I saw her leaving work. Something just came over me.
You didn't know her?
I'd never seen her before.
She was scraping her windows on her car.
Hey.
And he walked up behind her.
Can I help you?
Oh, no, I got it, thanks.
Come on, let me help you.
No, it's fine.
Get in the car! Shut up! Come back here! Come back here!
He said he threw her in his car.
Get in the car! Shut up! Come back here!
Now, Cynthia McLuhan weighed 107 pounds. He could easily take physical control of her.
Let's go.
He said he wound up in a cemetery, a secluded area.
Right over here. This is where it was. I took out the knife and I told her to get on the ground.
Please don't kill me.
Get on the ground.
I will do anything.
He disrobed her.
Get on me.
He raped her. Then he said she tried to grab the knife, and it infuriated him. He said, my arm was just flying with that knife. He said, I normally don't stab people more than a few times. I don't know why I stabbed her so many. 25 times, you say? God, that's really nuts, isn't it? Yes, James, it really is nuts. Just like you.
Frankly, I think he was enjoying himself so much he couldn't stop. He saw Cynthia McLuhan as this object to play with, and it seems quite possible he continued his play with her by posing her.
He left her. He had her clothing in the car, and he thought he had to get rid of that. So he drove by this motel and dumps the clothing in the purse.
What'd you do with her bra and panties?
I don't remember.
I find that hard to believe.
He has a good memory, and yet he says he doesn't remember certain things, and that's nonsense. He does remember.
All right, let's go.
But for whatever reason, he doesn't want to say it.
The state of Colorado convicts James Rhodes of first-degree murder and sentences him to life in prison. But he won't be serving that time just yet.
Florida has first dibs on this guy, so he goes back to Florida to serve 6 consecutive life terms, and if he survives that, he comes to Colorado to serve yet another one.
Although he's only been convicted of attempted murder in Florida, James Rhodes is suspected of killing up to 10 other young women. However, none of those cases have been proven.
One of the major misconceptions about serial killers is that they are crazy. They are not crazy. They are very disturbed. Their impulses seem to reign freely in a way that's more consistent with a wild animal than a human being.
He was just a monster. How can somebody do the awful things that he did and leave a little girl without her mother?
Cynthia's little girl is now grown. She's had 2 daughters and
breathed the same air as a very rare snake, a serial killer.
Oak Ridge had been quiet for so long, but now the storm was coming, and with it, the truth. Detective Laura Cross sat in her small office, the dim glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Her fingers tapped nervously against the surface of the desk, her mind still reeling from the discovery made just hours earlier. The DNA didn't match Caroline Miller. That one revelation had opened the floodgates. And now, everything that had been buried, every question that had been left unanswered for years, was waiting for her to piece it together. Laura's heart raced as she thought back to the early days of the investigation. Thomas Harrison had been in Oak Ridge around the time Caroline Miller disappeared. He'd been in town for a business meeting, and some people remembered seeing him around the diner where Caroline had worked. But back then, no one thought much of it. He was just another visitor. No one had connected him to Caroline. Not until now. The town had always been a quiet place, small enough that people thought they knew everyone's story. But Oak Ridge was also a town where secrets could hide in plain sight. Everyone knew everyone, but no one knew everything. It wasn't until Laura dug deeper that she realized just how much was hidden beneath the surface. Laura grabbed the file on Thomas Harrison from her desk and spread it out in front of her. It was a thick folder, but it was mostly filled with business-related documents, the kind of things that any local businessman would have. There were no criminal records, no red flags. He was squeaky clean, almost too clean, too perfect. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the information, looking for anything that could explain how he was connected to Caroline Miller. As she read, she saw nothing out of the ordinary. But then, she stopped at one piece of paper. A hotel receipt, dated October 12th, 1985, the night before Caroline disappeared. It was for a room at the Oak Ridge Motel, just a few miles away from the diner where Caroline had worked. The receipt was signed by none other than Thomas Harrison. It was a small detail, a seemingly insignificant piece of information that had gone unnoticed for so long. But now, it stood out like a red flag. Laura's pulse quickened. Could it be? Could Thomas Harrison have been involved in Caroline's disappearance? The connection was thin, but it was enough to demand attention. She picked up the phone and dialed the Oak Ridge Motel. Her voice was steady as she asked for details about the reservation. The clerk on the other end hesitated, but after a few moments, agreed to check the records. It didn't take long for him to confirm that Thomas Harrison had indeed stayed there the night before Caroline went missing. And he hadn't checked out until the morning, just hours after Caroline was last seen. Laura leaned back in her chair, absorbing the weight of the information. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the questions only grew. Why had Harrison been there? Had he known Caroline? Had he been the last person to see her? Was he involved in her disappearance? Or was there something else going on, something even darker that Laura hadn't yet uncovered? The town of Oak Ridge had always been small, tight-knit. Everyone knew everyone. But now, as Laura dug deeper into Thomas Harrison's past, she began to realize that there were layers to the town, layers that most people had never seen, and some of those layers were rotting beneath the surface. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Thomas Harrison's past was full of contradictions. On paper, he was the picture of success, a respectable businessman who had built his wealth from the ground up. But as Laura delved deeper, she began to uncover things that didn't add up. There were rumors about shady business deals, about people who had crossed him and then mysteriously disappeared. There was a story about a woman who had left Oak Ridge shortly after a brief affair with him. Some people said she'd left because of him. Others said she'd disappeared. Laura's mind raced as she pieced together the timeline. The receipt, the DNA match, the rumors. All of it was leading her to one conclusion. Thomas Harrison was involved. But the question was how. Had he been involved in Caroline's disappearance, or was there something even more sinister happening in Oak Ridge? She stood up from her desk, her mind spinning. She needed answers, but she couldn't do this alone. She grabbed her jacket and headed for the door. It was time to talk to someone who might know more than he was letting on. Someone who had been close to Thomas Harrison. The small town of Oak Ridge had once been a quiet place where nothing ever happened. But now, everything was changing. Secrets that had been buried for years were beginning to surface, and the truth about Caroline Miller's disappearance was waiting to be uncovered. And as Laura stepped into the cold night air, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the storm that was coming. The air was thick with anticipation as Detective Laura Cross stepped out into the night. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the humidity lingered, clinging to her clothes like a heavy fog. The small town of Oak Ridge, once a place of quiet routine, was now a tinderbox waiting for a spark. She could feel it in her bones, the unease, the suspicion. The truth, she knew, was close, but every step she took toward it seemed to lead her deeper into the web of secrets that had been spun over decades. Her destination was clear. It wasn't just the receipt or the DNA match that had pushed her to act tonight. It was the feeling, the nagging, insistent feeling that Thomas Harrison had something to hide. She needed to confront him, but there was no guarantee he would give anything up. No, Harrison wasn't some foolish criminal blundering through his tracks. He was methodical, smart, and above all, he had power. Power in Oak Ridge, power that extended far beyond the town limits. Laura knew she needed more than just a confrontation. She needed someone who could unravel the pieces that Harrison had so carefully put together, someone who could crack the veneer of respectability he had so meticulously built. There was only one person who might have the answers she needed: Claire O'Neill. Claire had been Caroline Miller's closest friend, the one person who had never stopped searching for her, even when the rest of Oak Ridge had moved on. For years, Claire had been a fixture at the local police station, constantly badgering the authorities, asking for updates, refusing to let anyone forget Caroline. The disappearance had left a hole in her heart that she had never filled. She had always believed there was more to the story, something the police had missed, something that had slipped through the cracks. Laura had spoken to Claire just once before, when the case had first gone cold. But tonight, she would need more than just a friendly conversation. She needed answers. As she pulled up to Claire's house, the familiar sight of the weathered porch and flickering light bulbs greeted her like an old friend. It was a small house, modest, with a faded sign that read, "O'Neill Family," on the mailbox. Laura knocked softly on the door, feeling the weight of the silence that stretched between each passing second. It was late. Too late for most people. But Claire had never been one to shy away from the night. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing a tired but determined face. Claire's eyes were puffy, and her hair, once neatly kept, now hung loosely around her shoulders. But despite the years of grief, there was a fire in her eyes, one that hadn't dimmed, not even a little. "Detective Cross," Claire said, her voice thick with a mix of exhaustion and something else, something Laura couldn't quite place. "I didn't think you'd be coming tonight. What's this about?" "I need your help, Claire," Laura said, stepping inside. "There's something new about Caroline's case, something big." Claire's face immediately hardened, the air around them shifting as if she knew this moment would come, but had been dreading it for years. "Go on," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's about Thomas Harrison," Laura began. "We've found a connection between him and Caroline, a DNA match." She paused, watching Claire's reaction. "He was in town the night she disappeared." The room seemed to fall silent, the air thick with the unspoken tension of years of uncertainty. Claire's breath caught, and for a moment Laura wondered if she was about to break. But instead, Claire straightened her shoulders, her face resolute. "I knew it," Claire murmured, almost to herself. "I always knew there was something off about him, but I couldn't prove it. I never could." Laura frowned, intrigued. "What do you mean? You knew him? I didn't know him personally." Claire replied, her voice steady, but filled with a hint of disbelief. "But I knew Caroline. She spoke about him, about that night. It wasn't the first time she'd met him. She'd met him at the diner a few weeks before, and there was something about him, something that didn't sit right." Claire paused, as if debating whether or not to continue. Laura remained silent, urging her to go on. Caroline didn't trust him, but she didn't want to say it outright. You see, she had this feeling. She told me she was going to meet him again that night, but she didn't say why. It wasn't like her to keep secrets from me, but that night she did. She just said she'd be home later, and then she was gone. Laura felt a pang of guilt. "We've all failed her," she said quietly, not sure if she was speaking to Claire or to herself. Claire's eyes met hers. "No, Detective, you didn't fail her, but you're getting close now. Very close. There's something more to Harrison. He's been hiding something for years, something darker than you think." Laura leaned in, her voice low. "What is it?" Claire hesitated before answering. "He wasn't just some businessman. He was involved in something bigger, something illegal. I don't know all the details, but I know this. If Caroline was getting too close to the truth, if she started to ask the wrong questions, then Thomas Harrison would do whatever it took to keep his secrets safe." Laura's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that Caroline had uncovered something dangerous? Had she stumbled upon a hidden world of crime, of corruption that no one in Oak Ridge had ever suspected? Could Thomas Harrison be the key to something much larger, something that reached beyond the small town she had called home? Laura's mind raced as she thought of the implications. But there was no time to waste. She needed to confront Harrison, and she needed to do it now. The pieces were falling into place, but they were just pieces. The bigger picture was still a mystery. She had no idea just how deep this rabbit hole went, but she knew one thing for certain. If she didn't act soon, the truth might be lost forever. Claire stood up, her voice calm but firm. "You're going to find out everything you need to know. But you need to be careful, Detective. Harrison won't just hand you the truth. He's dangerous, and he's been hiding something for a long time." Laura nodded, knowing that whatever was coming, it was going to be bigger than anything she had ever imagined. The town of Oak Ridge was about to be changed forever, and the truth would finally come to light. The weight of Claire O'Neill's words lingered in the room like a dark cloud, suffocating the air around them. Laura's mind churned, grappling with the new revelations. Thomas Harrison, a businessman who had spent years in Oak Ridge under the guise of respectability, now seemed to be at the heart of a web far more sinister than anyone had ever imagined. There was no time to waste. Laura stood up abruptly, her resolve hardening. She couldn't let this sit for another minute. "Where do I find him?" she asked Claire, her voice determined, no room left for doubt. Claire hesitated for only a moment, then answered, her eyes narrowing. "He has a property on the outskirts of town. a place he likes to keep to himself. It's isolated, hidden away from the rest of Oak Ridge. No one knows exactly what goes on there. But I've heard things. Whispers from people who've seen things they shouldn't. Laura's heart beat faster. This was it. This was the break she needed. "I'm going there tonight," she said, her tone firm. Claire didn't try to stop her. Instead, she placed a hand on Laura's arm. "Be careful, Detective. I don't know how far this goes, but I know enough to tell you this. If Harrison is hiding something, he's not going to let it go easily. He's been playing this game for years." "I'll be fine," Laura replied. But she didn't feel fine. Every instinct in her screamed that this was the moment when everything could go terribly wrong. But it had to be done. The truth had been buried for far too long, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. With a final glance at Claire, Laura stepped back into the night. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with tension. Oak Ridge was still quiet. Too quiet. Laura's footsteps echoed on the wet pavement as she made her way to the car. The town that had been so familiar, so predictable, now felt like a stranger. The closer she got to the outskirts of town, the heavier the air seemed to become. The streets grew narrower, the houses more spaced out, the lights fewer and farther between. The town was fading into the shadows, and the darkness was closing in on her. Her headlights sliced through the thick night, cutting through the rain-slicked road as she drove toward the property Claire had described. It wasn't far, maybe a 10-minute drive, but it felt like an eternity. Her thoughts were a blur, images of Caroline Miller's disappearance, the connection to Thomas Harrison, Claire's warnings. Everything was rushing through her mind, each thought louder than the last, and then, there it was. The house. Or what Laura could barely call a house. It looked more like a fortress, an imposing structure sitting alone on a hilltop, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to reach for the sky. The driveway was long and winding, barely visible in the dim light. As Laura drove up, her headlights illuminated a high, blackened gate, its iron bars twisted and ominous. There was no welcome here, no warmth, just cold, metal, and silence. Laura parked her car at the base of the driveway, the engine's hum dying down into the thick stillness of the night. She took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, the cool air biting at her skin. The trees rustled in the wind, their branches creaking and groaning, as if they too were nervous about what was coming. She moved quickly, walking toward the gate, her footsteps muffled by the wet ground. She scanned the area, but the place was eerily quiet. No lights in the windows, no movement, just the feeling that someone was watching, waiting, hidden in the shadows. Laura approached the gate, her eyes searching for any sign of life, any sign of Harrison. The gate was locked, but that didn't stop her. She wasn't about to turn back now. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a set of tools, tools she had never thought she would use for something like this. But tonight was different. Tonight, she was prepared to do whatever it took. It didn't take long before the lock clicked open. Laura pushed the gate slightly ajar, careful not to make a sound. She slipped through, moving with practiced ease, her breath steady despite the pounding of her heart. Her senses were heightened, every creak of the trees, every gust of wind making her jump. She knew she was getting closer. She could feel it. As she walked up the path to the house, her eyes darted between the shadows, looking for any signs of movement. She reached the front door and hesitated. Was Harrison inside? Was he waiting for her, or had he left? Was this a trap? She didn't know, but there was only one way to find out. With a deep breath, she raised her hand and knocked on the door, the sound echoing through the empty night. There was no response. She knocked again, louder this time, her patience thinning. "Thomas Harrison!" she called out, her voice sharp. "I know you're in there. Open up!" Still, nothing. The house remained silent. Laura's pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. She turned the doorknob. It was unlocked. Without thinking, she pushed the door open, stepping into the darkness. The smell of dust and age hit her immediately, the air thick with neglect. The interior was dimly lit by a few weak lamps, casting long shadows across the room. The furniture was old, covered in sheets. Everything about the place felt abandoned, forgotten, but something about it also felt wrong. Her hand hovered over her gun holster as she moved through the house. Her instinct screamed at her to leave, but she couldn't. Not when she was so close. Every step felt like it could be her last, but she pressed on. She moved through the rooms, searching for any sign of Thomas Harrison, any clue that could lead her to the truth. In the back of the house, she found a staircase leading to the basement. The door at the top was slightly ajar, just enough to let the faintest sliver of light escape. It was here, deep in the heart of the house, that Laura knew she would find what she was looking for. The truth. But as she descended into the basement, her heart sank. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with boxes, crates, and old belongings. But among the piles of forgotten objects, there was something far darker, something that shouldn't have been there. A box, small and unassuming, sat on the floor. Laura crouched down, opening it carefully. Inside, she found what she had been hoping for, and what she had feared to find all at once. Photographs. Old, yellowed photographs of Caroline Miller. And behind them, letters. Letters written in a familiar hand, but this time they weren't addressed to Caroline. They were addressed to Thomas Harrison. Laura's breath caught in her throat as she sifted through the papers. The truth was staring her in the face. And suddenly, everything changed. The photographs were grainy, their edges worn with age, but there was no mistaking the girl in every one. Caroline Miller. Her bright smile, her sparkling eyes, frozen in time, just as she had been the night she disappeared. The pictures weren't taken casually. They were intimate, personal. There were shots of her in places she had never been. Her face at angles that suggested someone had been watching her closely. The photos were not taken by chance. They were carefully staged, meticulously planned. Laura's fingers trembled as she sifted through them, her heart pounding louder than the thoughts racing through her mind. Who had taken these pictures, and why? The letters underneath the photos were just as disturbing. The handwriting was smooth, deliberate, the kind of writing someone would use when trying to appear calm, controlled. But as Laura read, her stomach twisted in knots. They weren't love letters or pleas for forgiveness as one might expect. No, these were darker, more insidious. They detailed observations, notes on Caroline's habits, her routine, even the places she liked to visit. The writer spoke as if they were a constant presence in her life, but hidden in the background, unnoticed. The letters made it clear that Caroline had been watched for weeks, maybe even months, before she vanished. Every step she took, every choice she made, had been catalogued, scrutinized by someone who knew her too well, someone who had been lying in wait. Laura's mind raced, trying to connect the dots. This wasn't just a case of a missing woman, this was something far more twisted. Someone had been stalking Caroline, playing a game with her life, with everyone in Oak Ridge. And now it seemed that Thomas Harrison had been at the center of it all. Had he been the one watching her? Had he been the one behind the photos, the letters? The deeper Laura dug, the darker the truth seemed to get. She read the final letter, the one that chilled her to her core. It was written just days before Caroline's disappearance. The words were simple, but the message was clear. I know your secret. I know what you're planning. If you tell anyone, if you try to escape, I will make sure you regret it. You'll be mine. Always. Laura felt the blood drain from her face. The fear, the helplessness Caroline must have felt, came rushing back in an overwhelming wave. She had been hunted. And Thomas Harrison had been the one behind it. But why? What had driven him to this? What had Caroline known that made her a target? The sudden realization hit her like a freight train. Caroline hadn't just stumbled upon something dark. She had been involved in it from the very beginning. She had known Harrison. She had seen something, uncovered something about him, something that was powerful enough to make him want to silence her. Caroline had been getting too close to the truth. And now she was gone, buried under layers of lies, hidden in the dark corners of Oak Ridge. Laura stood up, the letters clutched in her hand, her mind spinning. She had to find Harrison. She had to confront him, get him to confess. The case was slipping out of her grasp, but she couldn't let it go. Not now, not when she was so close, not when the pieces were finally falling into place. She turned and started to leave the basement, but something stopped her. A noise, a faint sound. It came from the direction of the stairs, from the upper levels of the house. Someone was here. Someone was watching her. Laura's heart pounded in her chest as she silently moved toward the staircase. She couldn't afford to make a sound. Every step felt like an eternity as she ascended the stairs, her hand instinctively moving to the gun holstered at her side. She reached the top, her breath shallow, her mind racing. The house was still, too still, like a predator waiting to pounce. Then she heard it again, a soft shuffle, a whisper of movement. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the hallway. The lights flickered. And then, there it was. Movement at the far end of the corridor, a shadow slipping behind a door. It was him, Thomas Harrison. Laura's instincts kicked into overdrive. She moved quickly, but quietly, toward the door. She didn't know what she would find inside, but she knew this was the moment. It was now or never. She reached the door and paused, listening. Nothing. She carefully turned the doorknob, pushing the door open with barely a sound. Inside, the room was dimly lit, just enough to make out the outlines of furniture. Harrison's silhouette loomed in the corner, standing still, almost as if he had been waiting for her. He didn't speak. He didn't even move. It was as if time itself had stopped. Laura's voice cut through the silence. "It's over, Harrison. You're not getting away with this." For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then, slowly, he turned to face her. His eyes were cold, calculating, but there was something else there, something darker, a flicker of recognition, a trace of fear. "You've come too far," he said, his voice low and steady, but there was an edge to it. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," Laura shot back. "And I'm not leaving without answers. Why, Caroline? Why did you do it?" Harrison smiled, but it wasn't a smile of relief or acceptance. It was the smile of someone who knew they were about to lose. "You think you can stop me? You have no idea what you've uncovered." Laura's hand tightened around her gun. "You're under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Caroline Miller," she said, stepping forward. "You can come quietly, or you can fight me. But this ends tonight." Harrison's face twisted into something dark, something almost unrecognizable. For the first time, Laura saw the cracks in his facade. The mask was slipping. He wasn't the calm, collected businessman anymore. He was something far worse. "You don't know how deep this goes," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "You don't know what you've started." Laura stepped closer, her voice hardening. "I know everything I need to know. You're finished." But just as she was about to move forward, Harrison made his move. In a flash, he lunged toward the desk behind him, grabbing something, a weapon, something sharp, and swung it in her direction. It happened so quickly. Too quickly. Time seemed to slow as Harrison lunged forward, his hand reaching for something on the desk, something sharp, glinting in the dim light. Laura's instincts kicked in immediately. She dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the flash of metal as it swung toward her. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind screaming for her to react, to stop him before it was too late. Harrison wasn't just any man. He was a predator. The moment he realized he'd missed, his eyes flared with a deadly intent. He stepped forward, his body tense, his grip tightening on the knife. He was fast, but Laura was faster. She reached for her gun, her hand shaking but steady enough to draw it in one swift motion. The weight of the weapon was a small comfort in the chaos of the moment. Harrison moved again, But Laura was ready. She fired once, the sound deafening in the silence of the room. The shot didn't miss. Harrison froze. His expression twisted in disbelief as he looked down at his side. The blood blossomed from the wound, dark red staining his shirt. He staggered, his breath shallow, as if the reality of what had just happened hadn't fully registered. He looked at Laura, his eyes wild, a mixture of anger, fear, and confusion swirling behind them. You shot me!" he gasped, as if the words themselves were foreign to him. Laura stood tall, her gun aimed directly at him. "It's over, Harrison. You're not getting away with this." He tried to take a step toward her, but his legs buckled, and he collapsed to the ground, his hand pressed against the wound. The blood soaked through his fingers, spreading across the floor. But even as he fell, there was a cruel smile creeping onto his face. It wasn't the look of a man who was defeated. It was the look of someone who had something else in mind. "You think you've won?" Harrison spat, his voice raspy. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. The truth is far darker than you think. There are people, powerful people, who won't let you expose this." Laura's grip tightened on the gun, but she kept her stance firm. "You're under arrest for the abduction and murder of Caroline Miller. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." But Harrison didn't seem to care. His eyes glazed over, and for a moment he seemed to drift into a daze. His breathing became shallow, erratic, as if the weight of the situation was finally catching up with him. "Don't you understand?" he whispered, barely audible. "You can't stop what's already started. It's too late. Too many people are involved." Laura took a step closer, her mind racing. "What do you mean? Who else is involved?" Harrison's smile grew wider, but there was a madness behind it. "You think I'm the only one? You think I'm the mastermind? There's more, always more. Always." He reached out weakly, grasping at nothing as his vision blurred. "You'll never find them. They'll bury you, detective. You'll be nothing but a footnote in their story." Laura's pulse quickened. Harrison was slipping away, his blood staining the floor beneath him. She needed answers, but she wasn't going to get them from him. She wasn't going to let him die with this. She moved forward, kneeling beside him, trying to get any kind of response, any clue that could lead her further down the rabbit hole. "Who are they?" Laura demanded, her voice low but urgent. "Tell me, and I'll help you." Harrison's body twitched, his eyes fluttering closed as his life slipped away. "It's too late for that," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "You should have stayed out of it." With one final shuddering breath, he fell still. Laura sat back on her heels, the weight of the moment settling in. The man who had been at the center of Caroline Miller's disappearance, the man who had been stalking her, who had hidden his crimes behind a facade of power and respectability, he was gone. But Harrison's last words echoed in her mind. There was more to this, much more. Someone else was pulling the strings, and they wouldn't let her expose the truth so easily. Her grip on the gun remained steady, but her heart raced. She had solved the case. Harrison was the one who had kidnapped Caroline. He was the one who had been stalking her, controlling her. But now, she had a new question, one that weighed heavier than anything else. Who were these powerful people he had spoken of, and how far did their influence go? Laura stood up, holstering her gun as she surveyed the room. She needed to call it in. Harrison was dead, but his death wasn't the end of this story. It was only the beginning. She stepped outside the room, reaching for her phone. As she dialed the number for backup, her thoughts raced. She had to get this information to the right people. She had to find out who was involved. But even as she dialed, a nagging feeling crept up her spine. Harrison's death wasn't a relief. It was a warning. Someone else was out there, watching, waiting. She needed to act fast, but she wasn't alone in this. There were still people who cared about Caroline Miller, people who had been fighting for justice for years. It was time to bring them into the fold. The answer wasn't here in the shadows of Harrison's home. It was somewhere else, somewhere deeper, hidden beneath layers of corruption and deception. As the sirens began to wail in the distance, Laura stepped outside into the cold night, her breath misting in the air. The truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered, and she wasn't about to let it slip through her fingers. Not now, not when she was so close. The cold night air wrapped itself around Detective Laura Cross as she stood on the front steps of Thomas Harrison's house, watching the flashing lights of the police cars reflect off the rain-slicked pavement. The sirens wailed in the distance, a sound that felt almost surreal after the silence she had just left inside. It was over, or so she thought. The body of Thomas Harrison had been taken, and the scene was now under investigation. The coroner would handle the details, but Laura knew that his death would only raise more questions. Harrison was gone, but the people he had been working with, the people he had feared, were still out there, hiding in the shadows. They wouldn't let his death go unanswered. She could feel it in her gut. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, dragging her thoughts back to the present. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was from Claire O'Neill. "Detective, it's Claire," the message read. "I need to speak with you now." Laura didn't hesitate. She dialed Claire's number, the phone ringing only once before Claire picked up. "Detective, I just heard." Claire's voice cracked, but it was full of urgency. "I've been talking to some people. You need to be careful. They're going to come for you next. You've uncovered something dangerous, and they're not going to let you take it any further." Laura's pulse quickened. "Who are they, Claire? Who's behind this?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't have all the answers, but I've been talking to a few people who used to work for Harrison. They're scared. They say there's a group behind him, people who've been pulling strings for years. Powerful people. And if they know you're getting too close to the truth, they won't stop until you're silenced." "Claire, I need names. I need details," Laura said, her voice tight with tension. "I don't know if I can get that for you, but I can tell you this," Claire replied, her voice shaking. "There's a lot more at play here than just one man. Harrison wasn't working alone. He was part of something much bigger, something that's been running under the surface for a long time, and those people won't just let you take them down." Laura stood still, her eyes scanning the street around her. She could feel the weight of the night pressing down on her. She was in danger. This wasn't just a case of a single criminal. This was the beginning of something far more sinister, and she had walked straight into the heart of it. "I don't know how much longer I can stay safe if they know I'm involved," Claire added, her voice frantic. "You need to be careful, Laura. If they find out what you're investigating, they'll stop at nothing to shut you down." Laura's thoughts raced. She couldn't back down now. Caroline Miller's death, Harrison's twisted game, and the hidden network of people pulling the strings. It was all connected. But she needed to know more. She needed to understand how deep the corruption ran. She needed to find those responsible. And she needed to do it before they could stop her. "I can't stop now, Claire," Laura said firmly. "This is bigger than Harrison. It's bigger than Oak Ridge. I'm going to find out who they are, and I'll make sure they don't get away with this." She hung up the phone, her mind already moving ahead. She had to act quickly. Every moment she spent in Oak Ridge felt like a risk now. The people behind Harrison were watching. They were waiting for her to slip up. They knew she was on their trail, and they wouldn't let her get away with it. Laura drove back to the police station, her thoughts focused on what Claire had said. Harrison had been a puppet, a cog in a larger machine. But who was behind it? Who had the power to manipulate someone like him for so long? Laura's mind kept circling back to the same question. Who were these powerful people? When she arrived at the station, she was met with a flurry of activity. Officers were working tirelessly, piecing together what little they had from Harrison's death. But Laura knew that this was just the surface. The true enemy lay deeper, hidden beneath layers of deceit. She walked into the chief's office, where Captain Thompson was waiting. He looked up as she entered, his face tense with concern. "Detective, I heard about Harrison. What do we have?" he asked, his voice low. Laura took a seat, her eyes locked on the captain. Harrison is dead, but he wasn't working alone. There's a network, a group of people who've been running things behind the scenes for years. I need access to any files we have on him, any connections to other businesses, anyone who may have been involved in his operations. Thompson stared at her, his eyes narrowing. You're sure about this? I mean, Harrison was a businessman, yes, but to say he was involved in some kind of conspiracy— I'm not asking for your opinion, Captain. I'm telling you what's happening. Laura cut him off. I need those files. I need to know who else is involved in this. Thompson hesitated, his gaze shifting between Laura and the papers in front of him. Finally, he sighed and pushed a stack of files toward her. Fine, but be careful. I don't want to see you get tangled up in something bigger than you can handle. Laura nodded, taking the files and walking out of the office. She had her next move. She had to find out who was protecting Harrison, who had been helping him cover up his crimes. There were pieces to this puzzle that hadn't even been touched yet, but she could feel them coming together, one by one. As she sat down at her desk, flipping through the files, the weight of the situation began to sink in. There were names in the documents, names she didn't recognize. Companies, businesses, and people who had crossed paths with Harrison in the past. But there was something else, too. Something that stood out. A series of encrypted emails, hidden deep within the files. Laura's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she began to decrypt the messages. The text that appeared before her made her stomach churn. The messages were from a private server, one that was linked to a shadow network of powerful figures who controlled far more than just Oak Ridge. And at the heart of it all was a name that made Laura's blood run cold. Cross. She whispered to herself. It's always been you. The name sent a shiver down Laura's spine, one she couldn't shake no matter how hard she tried. It was a name she knew well, too well. Her own name. Cross. But this wasn't just a coincidence. The encrypted emails pointed directly to people she knew, people in positions of power far higher than anyone she had ever suspected. The text on the screen was cold, calculated, revealing pieces of a puzzle Laura had been trying to solve for months. It was a thread, one that had been carefully hidden, weaving through the darkest corners of Oak Ridge, and now it was in front of her. She leaned in, her eyes scanning the message once more, every word sinking in deeper. The network wasn't just a group of criminals hiding in plain sight. It was something more organized, more strategic. And somewhere in those encrypted emails, Laura's name had appeared. Not just as a name, but as a target. The words that stuck out the most were chilling. Cross is too close. Terminate before the investigation goes public. Terminate. The word burned in her mind, but it didn't come as a shock. She had known it wasn't just Harrison. He had been a pawn, a piece of something much larger. Someone was protecting him, and now they were targeting her. This was no longer just a case of finding Caroline Miller's killer. This was about survival. Laura's hands trembled as she pulled up the rest of the messages, trying to decipher who was behind this network. She needed to know who was pulling the strings, who had known about Caroline's investigation, and why they had kept it hidden for so long. As she scrolled through the messages, a name finally appeared. A name that was more familiar than any she would have liked. It was her father's name, Paul Cross, the former chief of police in Oak Ridge, the man who had been the very foundation of law and order in this town for years before his sudden, unexpected retirement 5 years ago. Laura had never questioned his departure. He had grown tired of the bureaucracy, of the endless politics. At least, that's what he had always said. But now, with this email, everything about her father's departure felt like a lie. She had been living under the illusion of his innocence, thinking he had simply wanted a quiet life. But the truth was something darker. The truth was that her father had been involved. He had been involved with these people all along. Laura's head spun as she tried to absorb the implications of what she was reading. Paul Cross, the man who had raised her, who had always been her rock, was tied to this web of corruption, of violence, and of bloodshed. She wanted to scream, to throw the computer across the room, but she couldn't. She had to stay focused. She had to keep going. The pieces of the puzzle were all falling into place, but with every new revelation, the questions only deepened. Who was her father working with? Was he the one who had orchestrated Caroline's death? Or was he merely a part of a much larger conspiracy? She rubbed her temples, trying to calm the storm inside her mind. The more she dug, the more the answers eluded her. The encrypted emails weren't just about Caroline. They were about her, about everything she had known, everything she had been raised to believe. Her father had been a part of the criminal underworld she had been trying to expose, and it made sense now. Why the case had never been solved, why the investigation had always run into dead ends. Her fingers trembled as she navigated to the next email. It was from a different source, but the name in the header sent another chill down her spine. John Ramsey. John Ramsey was a name she recognized, but not in the way most people did. He wasn't a politician or a businessman. He was something far more dangerous. Ramsey had been a shadowy figure in Oak Ridge for years, a man who never seemed to get his hands dirty, but whose influence stretched far and wide. He had connections in every corner of town, every level of society. And like her father, he had managed to stay just out of reach of the law. She had suspected something about Ramsey for years, but never had she imagined he was this deeply involved in the darker side of Oak Ridge. It made sense now. Ramsey had been pulling the strings behind the scenes, using people like Thomas Harrison as puppets. He had controlled the town with a mix of wealth, power, and manipulation. But why Caroline? Why target a young woman who had seemingly stumbled into something far beyond her understanding? The answers were just within her grasp, but the walls were closing in. Laura wasn't just investigating a murder anymore. She was investigating a conspiracy that had been decades in the making. And she was at the center of it. Her father, John Ramsey. The people who had orchestrated this mess. They were all tied to her. They knew her, they watched her, and now they were going to come for her. She couldn't trust anyone. No one was who they appeared to be. Laura's phone buzzed again, and she looked down to see another message. It was from the police station. The message was brief, but the message was clear. "We need you at the station. It's urgent." Her heart skipped a beat. She couldn't go back to the station. Not when she was this close to uncovering the truth. She had to act now. But the danger was everywhere. She couldn't keep running forever. If she didn't face it head-on, it would consume her. As she left her apartment, her thoughts were consumed by the dangers ahead. She had to confront her father. She had to confront Ramsey. But she couldn't do it alone. She had already lost too much, sacrificed too much. She needed help. But who could she trust? The deeper she got into this investigation, the clearer it became that there were no allies left. She was on her own. The night was silent as she walked to her car. Oak Ridge seemed like a ghost town, quiet, eerie, as though even the town itself was holding its breath. She knew that everything was about to change. Everything she had believed in, everything she had trusted, was about to come crashing down. She started the car, her hands gripping the wheel. She knew where she had to go. She had to find her father. She had to confront him. The truth was out there, but it was buried under layers of lies and betrayal. And as she drove through the streets of Oak Ridge, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was driving straight into the heart of darkness. She had no idea what she would find when she reached him. But she knew one thing. The moment she stepped into the truth, there would be no turning back. Oak Ridge had never felt so cold, so distant. The streets she once knew by heart now seemed unfamiliar, as if the city had morphed into something alien overnight. The familiar landmarks, the stores, the houses, everything that had once felt like home now stood as silent witnesses to her unraveling world. Laura's mind raced as she drove, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white. She was heading for her father's house, the place she had grown up, the place that had always been her sanctuary. But tonight, it felt more like a prison. She had spent her life thinking her father, Paul Cross, had been a man of integrity, a beacon of justice in a town that sometimes seemed to lack it. But everything she thought she knew had been shattered with the discovery of his connection to Harrison, the network, and now, even deeper forces that stretched far beyond Oak Ridge. The encrypted emails had shown her the truth that her father had been deeply involved in the same underworld she had been trying to expose. And if that wasn't enough, she had learned that her own name had been flagged as a threat, a target in the web of lies and corruption. Her fingers tightened on the wheel. What was she supposed to do now? Confront him? How could she? What would she even say? Her mind was clouded, filled with questions, but no answers. She pulled into the driveway of her father's house, the old 2-story home that had once been filled with warmth and laughter. The house was dark, except for a dim light flickering in the upstairs window. The faint glow cast eerie shadows on the lawn, as if the house itself was waiting for something. Laura parked the car, took a deep breath, and stepped out. The night air was biting, the wind cutting through her jacket as she walked up the path to the door. Each step felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, but she couldn't stop now. She had to confront him. She had to know why. Her father had been her hero, the man who had taught her right from wrong, who had raised her with a sense of justice, integrity, and purpose. But now, she couldn't reconcile that image with the man she had uncovered in the files, an insider, a participant in a network that had used power and manipulation to cover up the worst crimes. She reached the door and paused. Her heart pounded in her chest as she lifted her hand to knock, but before she could, the door swung open. Standing in the doorway was her father, Paul Cross. He was older now, his hair graying, his face lined with age and stress. But there was something about him that still felt like home. "Laura," he said quietly, his voice a mixture of relief and wariness. "I knew you'd come." Laura didn't know how to respond. Her emotions surged, but she fought to keep them under control. "I need to know the truth," she said, her voice steady but firm. "Everything. About Harrison. About you. About the people behind all of this." Paul's face softened for a moment, but then a flicker of something darker crossed his eyes. He stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. "Let's talk," he said. Laura entered the house, her eyes scanning the familiar living room. The furniture was the same, the old photographs still hanging on the walls. It felt like nothing had changed, yet everything had. Paul motioned for her to sit, and she did, not trusting herself to stand any longer. Her legs were shaking, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. "I never wanted this for you," her father began, his voice low. "I never wanted you to be part of this. But you had to know. You deserve to know the truth." "No." He sat down across from her, his eyes tired, as though the weight of the years had finally caught up with him. "I didn't choose this life, Laura. I was recruited. You think you know what it's like being in the system. But sometimes the system has its own rules. You do what you have to do to survive." Laura shook her head, disbelief written across her face. "Survive? What are you talking about? You were the chief of police. You were supposed to be protecting this town, but you've been a part of it all along. You let people like Harrison run free. You let people like him ruin lives." Her father's face darkened. "I did what I had to do," he repeated, his voice edged with something Laura hadn't expected. "Regret? You think you understand this world, but you don't. You never have. When you're in charge, when you hold power, you have to make choices. You have to make deals. And sometimes those deals are with people who don't care about justice. They care about control, about money, about survival." Laura's chest tightened. Is that what happened with Caroline? Did you make a deal with Harrison? Is that why she had to die? Her father's face faltered. He looked down, as if the weight of the question had struck him harder than he had expected. Caroline. Caroline was different. She was asking the right questions. She was too smart for her own good, and she got too close to something she couldn't understand. He paused, his voice breaking. She didn't deserve what happened to her. But I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop him. Laura's mind reeled. You didn't stop it. You knew what was going on, and you didn't do anything. You let her die. Paul looked at her, his eyes haunted. I couldn't, Laura. I tried. But you don't know what it's like to have everything you've worked for, everything you've built, threatened. They'll kill you, Laura. If you get too close, if you keep digging, they'll come for you too. Laura's breath caught in her throat. Who, Dad? Who are they? He stood up, pacing the room, his hands trembling as he spoke. It's not just Harrison. It's not just one man or one group. This is bigger than you think. This goes all the way to the top, to people you don't even know, powerful people who can erase anyone who gets in their way. Laura stood up too, her hands clenched at her sides. Who, Dad? Who are they? Her father stopped, his eyes dark with fear. He looked at her, his expression filled with regret. I can't tell you that. I'm not allowed to. But you need to stop now. You need to walk away before it's too late. Laura's heart pounded in her chest. She had been walking into the darkness for so long, chasing the shadows. But now, with her father's words, the truth was clearer than ever. There was no turning back. She was in this now. She had to finish what she had started. I can't walk away, she said, her voice steady. I won't. Her father's expression crumbled, and for the first time, she saw the man who had raised her, the man who had taught her everything she knew about justice, break down. You don't understand. They will kill you, Laura, just like they killed Caroline. Laura shook her head. I'll stop them. I have to. The silence between them hung heavy, filled with unspoken words, filled with everything that had been left unsaid for so long. But Laura knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about her father anymore. It was about Oak Ridge. It was about Caroline. And it was about justice. And she wasn't about to let it slip through her fingers. The silence in the room felt suffocating, pressing down on Laura as she stood facing her father. His words, his warnings, his fear, everything he had said to her was sinking in, but none of it mattered. She couldn't walk away now, not when she was so close to the truth. You don't understand, Paul repeated, his voice hoarse, filled with desperation. These people are untouchable. They've been in control for so long. If you try to bring them down, they'll destroy everything you've worked for. They'll destroy you. They'll destroy everyone you love. Laura's gaze didn't waver. She couldn't let fear dictate her actions. You're wrong, Dad. They've already destroyed everything. Caroline's gone, and you've been hiding behind your badge and your power, pretending to be one of the good guys, while people like Harrison pull the strings. Paul stepped back, rubbing his temples as if the words were physically painful. It wasn't supposed to be this way, he whispered, his voice cracking. I wanted to protect you. I wanted to keep you safe. But now you're in too deep. You can't just take down a man like Harrison, not without bringing down everything else with him. It's bigger than you think. Laura took a step forward, her face set in determination. I don't care how big it is. I'm going to bring this down. I'm going to expose everything, and I'm going to make sure Caroline's death isn't just another cover-up. Her father looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed as if he were about to say something that could change everything. But the words never came. Instead, he turned away from her, walking toward the window. You don't know what you're asking. You don't know what it means to fight these people. You think you're the only one who's lost something in this? You think you're the only one who's suffered? Laura's chest tightened. I'm not fighting this alone, she said firmly. You've been lying to me, Dad. You've been a part of this all along. You knew what was going on, and you did nothing. Now you're going to help me." Her father turned, his eyes wild with emotion. "I can't help you, Laura. It's too late. The truth will kill you. You can't win this fight." "Then why didn't you tell me?" Laura demanded. "Why didn't you warn me before all of this? Why let me get so far into something I didn't understand?" "I tried to protect you," Paul shouted, his voice cracking. "I tried to keep you out of it, but you've always been too stubborn. Too much like me. And now look where we are." He paused, his face falling into an expression of deep regret. I'm sorry for everything. But you're too far gone. You have to walk away, Laura. You have to stop." "I can't stop," Laura said, her voice steady, unyielding. "Not now. Not when I'm so close. And if you won't help me, then I'll do it alone." Her father's face crumbled in defeat, the tears that had been welling in his eyes finally breaking free. "You'll never make it out of this alive," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "They'll come for you, and when they do, you won't be able to run fast enough." Laura stepped back, the weight of his words pressing down on her, but she couldn't let them stop her. She couldn't let fear control her. She had already lost too much to back down now. She couldn't fail Caroline. Not now, not when the truth was right in front of her. "I'll take my chances," she said coldly, her voice unwavering. Her father didn't respond. He just stood there, watching her as she walked toward the door. Laura didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Not now. The night had grown even colder as she stepped back out into the street. The lights of Oak Ridge flickered weakly in the distance, but they couldn't mask the growing sense of dread in her chest. She had just learned something about her father that she would never be able to unlearn. The man who had raised her, the man who had shaped her, was no longer the person she thought he was. But this wasn't about him anymore. It was about justice. It was about Caroline. It was about every person who had been a victim of the darkness that ran through Oak Ridge. And it was about the people who had orchestrated it all, the ones who had controlled the town, the ones who thought they were untouchable. She knew now that her father wasn't the only one involved. John Ramsey, the shadowy figure who had been manipulating everything from behind the scenes. He was the key. He was the one who had been behind Harrison. He was the one who had pulled the strings and had orchestrated the cover-up. Laura had learned enough from the files and the encrypted emails to know that Ramsey was dangerous, and not just in the way she had imagined. He was connected to powerful people, people who had deep ties in the business world, in politics, in law enforcement, people who had the power to make problems disappear, people who had made sure that Oak Ridge had stayed under their control for decades. But that control was slipping. Laura could feel it. She was getting closer, and she wasn't going to stop until she brought them all down. She reached her car, her hands trembling but determined. She had to act quickly. She had to confront Ramsey, but she knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed backup, someone who could help her bring down the entire network. She needed someone with authority, someone who could stand up to the people Ramsey had in his pocket. As she drove through the dark streets of Oak Ridge, her mind was set. She had a plan. She wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. She was going to take down the people who had been controlling the town for years, and she wasn't going to stop until she had justice. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with danger, but she wasn't afraid. She had come too far to turn back. She had to confront Ramsey. She had to expose him for who he really was. And this time, nothing was going to stand in her way. The car's engine hummed steadily beneath her as Laura drove, her mind consumed by everything that had unfolded. Each mile she passed felt like a step closer to unraveling the final pieces of the puzzle, but also closer to the storm that was quickly gathering around her. It was one thing to go after a single man like Thomas Harrison, but Ramsey was a different story entirely. John Ramsey was a name that carried weight, power, and influence. He wasn't just a businessman with dirty hands. He was the puppet master, the one who had pulled the strings for years, the one who had orchestrated a game of life and death, and he hadn't cared who got caught in the crossfire. Laura's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as she neared the location. She had found out through her research that Ramsey's operation wasn't based out of Oak Ridge. No, it was much larger. His reach extended far beyond the small town she had called home. But this was where it all started. Oak Ridge was the place where he had built his empire, where the seeds of corruption had been planted and nurtured. Her destination, an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place no one ever thought to look twice at. It had been on the town's radar for years, but no one had ever paid it much attention. The kind of place where the unwanted, the forgotten, could disappear without a trace. Perfect for someone like Ramsey to hide in plain sight. Laura pulled up to the dilapidated building, the lights of the city fading behind her. The air around the warehouse was thick with the smell of rust and decay. She parked her car in the shadows, careful not to draw attention to herself. She knew Ramsey would have eyes everywhere, people watching, people waiting. This was it, the final confrontation. She was close, so close. She stepped out of the car, her gun holstered, but ready. Her breath came in short, steady bursts, matching the rapid beat of her heart. Every step felt like a mile, the ground beneath her feet heavy and uncertain, as if it, too, was aware of what was coming. The warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows reflecting the pale light of the moon. The place had an air of abandonment about it, but Laura knew better. She had spent too many hours digging into Ramsey's operations to not know that this was where everything came together. Laura approached the side door of the warehouse, her senses on high alert. She could hear the faint sounds of movement inside. Voices, muffled, indistinct. They were here. Ramsey was here. She reached for the door handle, her breath held tight in her chest. With a quick turn, the door creaked open, and she slipped inside, blending into the darkness. Her eyes adjusted quickly, scanning the interior of the warehouse. The space was vast and empty, filled with crates and old equipment, but she knew that this was just the shell of what it used to be. This was no longer a place of business. This was where things went to hide. She moved silently, her footsteps barely audible against the concrete floor. The faint sound of voices grew louder as she approached the back of the building. She pressed herself against the cold concrete wall, inching forward, listening carefully. "Didn't expect her to get this far," one of the voices said, a man's voice, gruff and unfamiliar. "She's a real pain in the ass." "Don't underestimate her," another voice replied, this one colder, more calculated. "She's more dangerous than you think. She's not like the others. She's persistent. She won't stop until she gets the truth." Laura's heart skipped a beat. It was Ramsey's voice. He was here, and he knew she was coming. The pieces were falling into place. He had been preparing for this. He knew someone would come for him eventually, but he didn't think it would be her. He didn't think she would make it this far. Her grip on her gun tightened as she stepped closer, her every move measured and silent. She had to be ready for whatever was coming. "Have you taken care of the loose ends?" Ramsey's voice asked, growing closer now. "Yeah," another voice responded. "Everything's in place. She won't be able to stop us now." "Good," Ramsey replied, a dangerous calm in his tone. "She's not the only one looking for answers. But if she thinks she can bring this down, she's sorely mistaken. It's too late for her. Too late for anyone who tries to dig into what's really going on here." Laura's stomach churned. There it was again. Too late. Ramsey wasn't just trying to stop her. He was trying to bury the entire truth. He wasn't going to let anyone expose what had been happening in Oak Ridge. He was protecting a network of corruption so vast that it had seeped into every corner of the town. And now, Laura was in the middle of it. She rounded the corner, her gun raised, and there he was. John Ramsey, standing in front of a large desk, his back to her, surrounded by the shadows of men who worked for him. His hands were spread out like a conductor directing a symphony. But this was a symphony of manipulation, control, and destruction. "Ramsey!" Laura's voice cut through the darkness. He froze. His head slowly turned toward her, and for a moment Laura could see the flicker of surprise in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a smirk, a twisted, knowing smile. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice calm, almost pleased. "I didn't think it would take this long, but you've done well to get this far. I almost admire your persistence." "Your game is over, Ramsey," Laura said, her voice cold, unyielding. "You've been controlling everything in Oak Ridge for far too long. It's time for you to face the consequences." He chuckled, the sound echoing in the empty warehouse. "You think you've uncovered everything? You think you know the truth? You're just a pawn in this, detective. You've always been a pawn. Do you really think you can stop what's been set in motion?" "You've killed innocent people to protect your empire," Laura shot back, her voice filled with rage. "But it ends tonight. You're going down." Ramsey stepped forward, his calm demeanor slipping just slightly. "You're brave, Laura. I'll give you that. But it's too late. You don't understand the forces you're up against. You never did." The men around him shifted, sensing the change in the air. They were ready, just as he was, to do whatever it took to protect their own. Laura's fingers tightened around her gun. She was outnumbered, but she wasn't backing down. She had come too far, and there was no turning back now. Ramsey took another step, his eyes narrowing. "You don't know what you're dealing with. You're in over your head. But it doesn't matter. You'll never bring me down. No one will." Before Laura could react, one of the men lunged toward her. It was chaos. The gunfire was deafening, but Laura was quick, firing back with precision, hitting her mark. The warehouse erupted into a frenzy as the men scrambled to react. But Laura had one thing on her side: determination. She moved fast, her every step calculated, her gun steady in her hand. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for Caroline. She was fighting for the truth, and she wasn't going to let anyone stop her. "Your game is over, Ramsey," Laura shouted as she took aim. "It's time for you to pay for what you've done." The final showdown was about to begin, and Laura wasn't going to let anyone escape. The chaos of the warehouse swirled around her, a storm of gunshots, shouts, and the heavy sound of footsteps echoing across the concrete floor. Laura's heart raced, her instincts kicking into overdrive as she fought to stay one step ahead of the men moving toward her from all directions. There were too many of them. They were well-trained, prepared, but she wasn't going to let that stop her. With one swift motion, Laura ducked behind a stack of crates, her gun steady in her hand. Her breaths were rapid, her pulse pounding in her ears, but she didn't let it distract her. She had a job to do. She had come here to stop Ramsey, to bring down everything he had built in Oak Ridge, and she wasn't about to let his goons, or him, get away. Another burst of gunfire echoed through the warehouse. Laura leaned out just enough to take a shot, hitting one of the men square in the chest. He crumpled to the ground, but the other men quickly scattered, taking cover and returning fire. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder. "You're wasting your time, detective!" Ramsey's voice rang out, booming over the chaos, almost taunting her. "You think you can take me down? You've always been too naive!" Laura gritted her teeth. She knew Ramsey would try to talk his way out of this. He was the puppet master, the manipulator. But this time it was different. This time she wasn't listening. This time she had control. "You're not walking away from this?" Laura called back, her voice steady. She took cover behind a concrete pillar, peering out just enough to keep an eye on Ramsey's movements. "Not after everything you've done." Ramsey's face appeared in the distance, his silhouette barely visible through the thick smoke. He moved with the calculated precision of a man used to controlling every situation. He hadn't broken a sweat. He didn't seem scared. But Laura could see the smallest flicker of doubt in his eyes, the tiniest crack in his iron-clad confidence. "Do you really think this is just about me?" Ramsey sneered, his voice growing louder, more arrogant. "You've got no idea what you've gotten yourself into, Detective. You think you're the hero in this story? There are forces much bigger than you, much more powerful than anything you could ever imagine." Laura steadied her breathing, scanning the area. She could hear the sounds of the other men shifting positions, but she couldn't let them distract her. Ramsey was the target. He was the key to everything. The network, the power he had, all the lives he had ruined. It started with him. "You're the one who doesn't get it, Ramsey," she shouted, her voice sharp, cutting through the smoke. "You're not untouchable. You're just a coward hiding behind the people you've hurt." There was a tense silence before Ramsey laughed, a cruel, hollow sound that made her skin crawl. "You think I'm hiding?" he asked, his voice dripping with venom. "I'm not hiding, Detective. I'm running things. I'm the one who makes things happen. You? You're just a small-town cop trying to save a town that's already lost. A town that was always doomed." Laura took a deep breath, focusing. This was it. She was so close. She had the chance to end this, to take down the people who had destroyed so many lives. She wasn't going to let Ramsey distract her. She wasn't going to let him win. "I'm not going to let you win," she said firmly, her hand steady on the gun. "Not tonight, not ever." Without warning, she emerged from her hiding place, her movements quick and fluid as she fired another round. One of the men lunged at her from the side, but she was faster, sidestepping and firing another shot, hitting him in the leg. He collapsed, shouting in pain. The sound of the gunfire echoed through the building, and the men seemed to hesitate for a fraction of a second. That was all Laura needed. She rushed forward, keeping low to the ground, her gun raised. She knew the layout of the warehouse. She knew where Ramsey would be. She could hear his voice growing louder, more frantic as the situation began to spiral out of his control. And then she saw him. Ramsey stood at the far end of the warehouse, by the back door, surrounded by crates and shadows. He was trying to make his escape. Laura's heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't hesitate. She moved toward him, her gun trained on his every movement. "Don't even think about it," she called, her voice full of authority. "It's over, Ramsey. You're not going anywhere." Ramsey turned to face her, his face twisting into a mask of rage. "You think you've won? You've got no idea how deep this goes. You're nothing but a pawn in a game that's bigger than you. You think you're saving Oak Ridge? You're only digging your own grave." But Laura wasn't listening anymore. She was done with his games, done with his manipulations. She was done being controlled. "You're not in charge anymore," Laura said coldly, her finger tightening on the trigger. "Your game ends tonight." Ramsey made a sudden move, trying to dart toward a nearby exit, but Laura was faster. She fired. The shot rang out, and Ramsey staggered, his body lurching forward before he fell to the floor. A sickening silence followed, the world holding its breath, holding. Laura stepped forward cautiously, her gun still raised, but her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know if he was dead yet, but she wouldn't take any chances. She approached him slowly, watching for any sign of movement. Ramsey lay still, his hand barely twitching. She moved closer. "It's over," she whispered, the weight of the words sinking in. But then, a faint sound, something small, caught her attention. A faint click, a quiet, whirring sound. Laura's heart skipped a beat as she realized what it was. A bomb. Ramsey had set it up. He had known all along. He had been planning an escape, a way out. And now, with his final breath, he had triggered it. The explosion would take down the entire warehouse, and Laura knew that if she didn't get out now, she wouldn't make it out alive. Panic surged through her as she turned and sprinted toward the door. The ground shook beneath her feet as the countdown to the explosion began, the warehouse trembling with the impending blast. She didn't look back. She didn't dare. The explosion hit just as she reached the exit, the force of it throwing her to the ground. The world around her exploded into fire and debris, the sound deafening. Everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for, felt like it was crumbling in that instant. But Laura wasn't done. Not yet. She could still hear the faint sounds of sirens in the distance, the cavalry coming to help. She could still feel the remnants of the power she had fought so hard to take back. As she pulled herself to her feet, covered in dirt and blood, she knew that Oak Ridge was just the beginning. The truth was still out there. And she wasn't about to stop until it was exposed, no matter the cost. The world felt like it had been torn apart in that single moment. The explosion reverberated through Oak Ridge, shaking the ground beneath Laura's feet, and the deafening roar of fire and destruction echoed in her ears long after the blast. The warehouse was gone. The evidence, the pieces of the puzzle she had spent so long gathering, gone in an instant. But as she lay there, the dirt and debris clouding her vision, Laura knew something. She had come too far to let this stop her. She could still hear the sirens in the distance, their wail growing louder. Help was on the way. She had to stay alive. She had to make sure the truth didn't die with Ramsey. With a grunt, Laura pushed herself up, her body protesting with every movement. Her legs were shaky, her mind fogged from the blast, but her resolve was clear. She wasn't done. Not yet. Not when she was so close. Her hands were covered in dirt and blood, but she didn't pause to check for injuries. There was no time. There would be time for that later, once the danger was over. The fire raged behind her, the heat from the explosion still rolling over her like an unbearable weight. The sky was now a molten orange, illuminated by the flames of the destroyed warehouse. The thick black smoke curled into the air, mixing with the sounds of the distant fire trucks racing toward the scene. Laura's chest burned with every breath she took, but she forced herself to move. She had to get to the authorities before Ramsey's men regrouped, before they could clean up the mess he'd left behind. There were too many loose ends still left to tie up, too many questions that needed answering, and she wasn't about to let them vanish. As she stumbled toward the road, a familiar shape appeared in the distance. It was her car, still parked in the shadows. Laura's heart skipped a beat. Her legs felt weak, but the sight of it pushed her forward. She had to get to it. She had to get out of here. The pain in her side intensified as she jogged toward the car. She didn't know if it was from the explosion or from the earlier confrontation, but she couldn't afford to stop and check. Every second counted now. If Ramsey had set the bomb, then there was a good chance his men would be trying to cover their tracks too. They wouldn't just let her walk away from this. She reached the car and threw herself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut behind her. The engine roared to life, and she peeled away from the scene, the rubber of the tires screeching against the pavement as she sped through the streets of Oak Ridge. She didn't have a clear plan. She didn't know where she was going. But she knew one thing for sure. Ramsey's network was far from over. It had only just begun to crumble, but the pieces were still out there, and if she couldn't get them, someone else would. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a text from Claire. "Where are you? What's happening? I'm hearing reports of an explosion. Are you okay?" Laura's hands shook as she typed back, her fingers moving quickly. "I'm fine. Ramsey's dead. The warehouse is gone. I'm going after whoever's left. I need your help." Claire's response was almost immediate. "I'll meet you. We're running out of time." Laura's grip tightened on the steering wheel. She didn't have much time, and she knew that the moment she stepped back into Oak Ridge, the people behind the destruction would come for her. But this wasn't about Oak Ridge anymore. This was about the truth. This was about the people who had orchestrated everything, pulling strings from the shadows for far too long. She wasn't going to let them win. The city lights blurred as she drove through the streets, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror. The fear, the adrenaline, it all seemed to merge into a singular force, pushing her forward. She was the only one who could finish this. She was the only one who had seen the cracks in the system, the dark underbelly of Oak Ridge that no one else wanted to acknowledge. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Captain Thompson. "Laura, we've got a problem. We found Ramsey's associates. They're mobilizing. They know you're coming. They'll be looking for you. Get to safety." Laura didn't hesitate. She hit the accelerator, the car roaring faster through the night. Safety wasn't an option. She wasn't running anymore. She was hunting. She pulled into a secluded area, parking near an old industrial complex that was no longer in use. It was one of the places where illegal transactions had taken place, where the shadows hid the truth. She had learned about it during her investigation. And now, she had a feeling it would be the place where everything came together. The car's headlights illuminated the cracked pavement as she stepped out, scanning the area for any signs of movement. Her senses were heightened. She could feel the danger in the air, the weight of it pressing on her chest. But she couldn't afford to hesitate. Claire arrived moments later, her own car sliding to a stop next to Laura's. The two women exchanged a glance. No words needed to be said. They both understood what was at stake. "We're not walking away from this," Laura said, her voice low but steady. Claire nodded, her eyes hardening with determination. "We do this together." Laura led the way toward the back of the complex, moving cautiously, keeping her back against the wall. The silence around them was deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of the city. There was no telling who was waiting for them inside, but Laura had made her choice. She couldn't back down. Not now. They approached the entrance, the door slightly ajar. Laura's hand hovered over the handle, her heart pounding in her chest. The moment they stepped inside, there would be no turning back. With a sharp breath, Laura pushed open the door. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single hanging bulb. There were crates, stacks of documents, and several large machines scattered around the space. But at the far end, two men stood in the shadows, watching them approach. "Looking for something?" one of them asked, his voice gruff, laced with an unmistakable arrogance. "You should have stayed out of it, Detective." Laura didn't flinch. "I'm not leaving until I get answers," she said, her voice sharp and unwavering. The men moved forward, their postures tense, ready to act. But Laura was ready. She fired first. The shot rang out in the silence, hitting the first man square in the chest. He fell back, his body crumpling to the ground. The second man hesitated, but it was enough. Laura was already moving, her gun aimed and steady, her instincts guiding her. Before he could make a move, she fired again. The man dropped, his body limp as he hit the floor. Laura stood over them, her chest heaving with each breath, but her resolve never faltering. She had fought this battle for too long to stop now. The truth was close. It was just within her grasp. She glanced at Claire, who nodded, equally determined. Together they had brought this far. And now it was time to finish it. But there was still one more piece to the puzzle, and it was waiting. The two bodies lay motionless on the cold concrete floor, their lives extinguished in an instant. The sound of gunfire still echoed in Laura's ears, her pulse racing as adrenaline surged through her veins. But she didn't have time to pause. Not now. Not when she was so close. She turned to Claire, her eyes sharp, focused. "They're not the only ones. We need to move quickly," she said, her voice low but urgent. Claire nodded, her expression unreadable but determined. Where to next? Laura didn't hesitate. "We need to find out who's calling the shots. This doesn't end here. We need to track down Ramsey's real partners, the ones pulling the strings." They moved swiftly through the abandoned complex, their steps light but purposeful. The layout of the building was familiar to Laura. She had studied its design while working on the case. It was a hub for illicit activities, a place where the law had no place, and where those who operated in the shadows thrived. But now, it felt different. Now, this was the epicenter of something much bigger than Oak Ridge, something that reached far beyond the small town she had tried to protect for so long. Laura stopped at the far side of the warehouse, her eyes scanning the surroundings. There were crates stacked high, boxes filled with who knew what, likely part of the operation Ramsey had run. As she walked, her foot nudged something hard against the floor. She knelt down, pulling a small, worn envelope from beneath one of the crates. It was thick, sealed, and had a foreign stamp on it. Without hesitation, she opened it. The contents spilled out, Maps, documents, names, all things she had never seen before. This was it. This was the evidence they needed. The papers detailed locations, coordinates, and, most importantly, the names of people who had been involved in the criminal network. "This is it," Laura said, her voice steady. "This is how we end this." Claire glanced at the documents, her face hardening as she recognized a few of the names. "These people have been in Oak Ridge for years, and they've been hiding in plain sight." Laura turned the page and froze. The name at the top of the list sent a chill down her spine. It was one name she had hoped would never appear. "Paul Cross," she whispered. Claire's eyes widened, disbelief flickering across her face. "Your father?" Laura felt the ground beneath her feet shift, her stomach twisting. She knew it. She had suspected it all along, but seeing his name in black and white, on a list like this, it hit her harder than she expected. "He's involved," Laura said, her voice barely audible. "He was working with them. All these years, hiding behind the badge. He was a part of this." The revelation was like a knife to her chest. Her father, the man she had spent her whole life idolizing, had been involved in this web of corruption, working with Ramsey and the others. But the question that gnawed at her mind was, how deep did it go? Was he just a pawn? Or was he one of the masterminds? Claire placed a hand on Laura's shoulder, grounding her in the moment. "You need to confront him. He's the one who can tell you everything. If he's involved, if he knows how deep this goes, you need to hear it from him." Laura nodded slowly. She had known this moment would come. But now that it had arrived, she felt a weight she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just fighting for the truth anymore.